Hello, I'm Ed Vasquez from the Agricultural Research Service and the Eastern Oregon Agriculture Research Center, here to present today's Ag Minute. This week we'll be discussing rangeland monitoring, which is part of a broader process in which we use data to test and refine management decisions. Rangeland monitoring is intended to support a diverse set of goals required by various societal interests. For example, this can include livestock production, wildlife habitat, or invasive, threatened, and endangered species. Rangeland monitoring should provide data on three key attributes of landscape and ecosystem sustainability, which are soil and site stability, hydraulic function, and biotic integrity. Monitoring for these three basic attributes can serve as a foundation for use-specific monitoring such as livestock production. In other words, monitoring data provide the basis for management options that meet specific goals. Monitoring data can be used to evaluate the effects of past management or confirm effective management practices. In addition, monitoring data can also be used to identify trends that can be used to predict future changes so management can be adapted accordingly. The most useful monitoring programs help managers achieve long-term management objectives by generating relevant data. Consequently, it is essential to clearly define both management and monitoring objectives before designing a monitoring program. Please join me the rest of the week when we further explore important concepts for monitoring rangeland. Yesterday I talked about the importance of rangeland monitoring. Every time we change management or decide to continue with the same management, we are making a prediction. For example, we may decide to maintain a stocking strategy because we suspect that it does no harm to grass or soils. In order to accurately test our predictions, we need to carefully select both types of indicators and the monitoring locations. In addition, we must also take into account the effects of other influences on rangelands, such as climate and soil variations. This means also establishing and monitoring control plots or similar locations within exposures. Otherwise, there is no way to separate trends caused by current management practices from those caused by other factors such as climate change. Initially, the long-term management objectives should be clearly defined and listed. For example, the specific objectives may include maintaining or increasing the production of forage for livestock. Short-term management objectives that are necessary to achieve each of the long-term objectives for each type of monitoring unit should then be clearly defined and listed. Monitoring objectives will then follow directly from the management objectives. A combination of short-term and long-term monitoring programs is recommended. Long-term monitoring is designed to document changes in the condition of the land, such as in soil structure and plant basal cover, and is normally repeated every 1 to 5 years. Short-term monitoring may be repeated at any time interval and is essential to adjust management to ensure that the long-term goals will be met. Yesterday, I discussed the importance of clearly defining and listing long-term rangeland management objectives and the idea of establishing long and short-term monitoring programs to ensure that the long-term goals will be met. Once your long-term objectives are clearly identified, the next step is to stratify your land into monitoring units. Monitoring units are areas located in a particular part of the landscape, for example, flood basin or hill summit, within which vegetation, soil type, management, and current status are relatively similar. Monitoring units may range in size from less than an acre to several square miles or more. Landscape stratification is a three-step process. First, collect background information, maps, and photographs. This includes aerial photographs, satellite imagery, written and oral histories, property maps, ecological site descriptions, and soil maps. The second step is to define the stratification criteria. 3 criteria useful for a wide variety of ecosystems are soil landscape, current vegetation, and management. Soil landscape criteria include topography, landscape position, and soils. These criteria determine the potential of the unit to support different plant communities. Current vegetation within soil landscape units, along with historic management and disturbance, can also be used as stratification criteria, as can current and planned future management. The third step is to complete the stratification by dividing the area into monitoring units. This step can be broken down into separate parts based on the number of stratification criteria. For example, the area can be divided into ecological sites or functionally similar units. Yesterday, I discussed ways to stratify rangeland into monitoring units. The next step in establishing a monitoring program is to assess the current status of each monitoring unit. Assessments can be qualitative or quantitative and can use current status, apparent trend, or trend based on existing monitoring data. All assessments require some kind of reference. For example, the reference for the current status is generally the site potential, which is defined based on soil and climate or ecological site descriptions. Ecological sites are a classification of land types based on differences in important environmental factors including soil properties, slope, precipitation, and landscape position. They can be used to interpret quantitative and qualitative information and include partial species lists and basic soils information. There are a number of protocols currently available for assessing rangelands. For instance, two that are considered useful are Interpreting Indicators of Rangeland Health for Uplands by Pellet et al. And Process for Assessing Proper Functioning Conditions for Riparian Areas by Pritchard et al. Both have been applied by governmental and non-governmental organizations in the U.S. The protocols found in these documents should be applied by a team of trained personnel with a working knowledge of the local ecosystem. These documents and other supporting literature are available and easily downloaded at usda-ars.nmsu.edu under Monitoring and Assessment. The information gained by assessing the current status of the landscape can be used to refine management and monitoring objectives. This week I've been discussing the idea of establishing rangeland monitoring programs in order to meet the long-term management goals. Monitoring in some fashion is required to evaluate progress towards meeting management objectives of any enterprise. For rangeland enterprises, some planned approach to monitoring is essential to any attempt to practice adaptive resource management. Once the monitoring units have been established based on the management and monitoring objectives and the current status assessed, the next step is to select indicators and number of measurements. Two basic types of monitoring indicators are short-term and long-term. Short-term indicators should reflect short-term management objectives. Long-term indicators should reflect long-term changes in the landscape caused by changes in management, climate, and so on. The monitoring indicators selected will determine which measurements are needed, such as plant production by species used to determine herbivore carrying capacity. Some, like plant cover, can serve as short-term and long-term indicators. The final steps to establishing a monitoring program is selecting the monitoring locations and getting them established. Plots can be randomly selected using any map or aerial photograph. Stratified random sampling is identical to random sampling except the number of plots in each type of monitoring unit is predetermined. Subjective plot selection includes all approaches in which the person designing the monitoring program decides where to locate the plots without using a grid system. All three approaches have advantages and disadvantages. For detailed technical references on rangeland monitoring and electronic data forms, please visit usda-ars.nmsu.edu under Monitoring and Assessment. This is Ed Vasquez. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.